Hi everyone, you're very welcome. We're just going to wait another couple of minutes to allow people come online, and then we'll get started. So we might go ahead. So you're all very welcome to Let's Get Talking's webinar for World Mental Health Day. The theme this year for World Mental Health Day is equality everywhere for everyone. So we thought we'd take the opportunity today to talk to you a little bit about what's counselling about. Like, why is it for me? Maybe bust some common myths. Maybe remove some of the barriers if you're thinking about coming to counselling. Maybe some of the barriers that you might be having about actually getting in the door or picking up the phone. So I hope it'll be useful for all of you. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to pop them in the comment section or send a private message, and Amy, my colleague, will be texting them to me at the end. So if you're wondering why I'm looking down, it's looking at my phone to get your questions. So yeah, we'll just get started. So these are some of the common questions that people come to us with. So where can I get counselling? What happens in counselling? Some things that we've heard asked quite a bit. And also I'd like to talk a little bit about the common myths. And there's quite a few out there, and hopefully we'll be able to bust some of them today. So the most common one that we hear, and I hear quite a lot when people come in for assessment, for example, their first session at the centre, is only crazy or weak people go to therapy. The reality is that these are the top 3 wants of people who come into our centre. And we see about 300 people a week, whether it be online or face-to-face. And over the years, this is what we hear all the time. They want to reduce the stress and worry in their lives. They want to improve their relationships, or they're feeling stuck, whether it be in a job or a relationship or whatever else. So all those things are pretty not extraordinary. There are things that we've felt ourselves from time to time. I think everybody has felt this way from time to time. It doesn't take being crazy or weak or, to have, or to be mad, I suppose, to feel that way. So I suppose what we need to remember is to suffer is to be human. So everybody has experienced some sort of emotional pain in their life, and wants to improve things. Another common myth we hear is counsellors are passive and don't do anything. And I think that probably comes from TV representations or movie representations of therapy. We've all seen, on different programs or whatever, that classic, I suppose it's Freud who would relate that to, the kind of chaise longue and, the therapist sitting behind it and you can't even see him and he's nodding and smiling or, not doing much at all. So it's understandable that some people would feel that way. I suppose, this is the way I suppose I see therapy. And maybe that idea that counsellor just sits there and nods and smiles and, doesn't say a whole lot might come from, that idea of non-directive therapy. So in non-directive therapy, the client leads the way. So your counsellor, if you come to a non-directive therapist, and by the way, a counsellor can be directive sometimes and non-directive other times, depending on your needs. So the counsellor may ask open questions in non-directive therapy. They might reflect back the information you're presenting, just to seek clarification, to make sure that they're hearing you right, and then provide maybe possible interpretations. But all the way along, you are the expert and you're given the space to find solutions of your own. And that's what a lot of people find very valuable. If you're coming up with the solutions, it's easier, I suppose, to implement those solutions in your life. In directive kind of therapies, the counsellor leads the way. They often offer instructions to the client about how to deal with a specific problem. might be providing specific tools or techniques to address that problem. So CBT might be a good example. It's one of the most commonly known therapies, and that's quite, I suppose, manualized. There's certain steps and procedures that you would go through with your therapist, and specific tools that you might be asked to try out, whether in the session or between sessions. Another common myth is that counselling or psychotherapy will make painful problems worse. And that's kind of an understandable one, because if you've been carrying around something, some problem, some difficult memory or emotion for quite a long time, it's often difficult to name it, you know, and it can often feel like opening Pandora's box or allowing the floodgates to open. That's why I particularly like this picture, because it can feel that way. You know, do you really want to go there? So yes, you may talk about your past. You may talk about some difficult memories, but the idea of therapy is that it should be a safe place. So a good therapist will help you feel safe enough to talk about those painful memories or painful experiences, you know, and those painful emotions as well. And I suppose another common myth that we've come across is that counsellors, psychotherapists will just blame me and tell me off. I suppose my experience of that is usually if you've had that experience in your life, when you've gone to ask for help to somebody, ask for support, and they've reacted in that way by blaming or telling you off or telling you what to do, it's not surprising that you might feel that that's going to be your experience when you come into therapy. And I suppose when I think about who reminds me of that, I suppose it's Dr. Phil. Like, you know, if you've ever seen him, it's quite a lot about confrontation. And this is what you need to do, and you know, it's quite authoritative. But therapy is not about shaming or blaming or being told off. Another thing that people say is therapy is very expensive and I can't afford it. I suppose it's a bit of a stretch to say that's a myth because it can be very expensive. I suppose what I hope to show you now is that there's many different options when it comes to therapy. There's many different avenues. So that includes public services, so going through your GP, colleges and universities, most of them in the country have free counselling available. EAP, what I mean by that is employee assistance programs. So some larger companies would have employee assistance programs. You go through HR to find out more about that. And then of course private therapy, which is probably what most people think of when they think of therapy being expensive. It's another option. And then you would have counselling and psychotherapy centres like our own. So if you were to go to the public service way, usually the first point of contact would be your GP. And GPs generally refer to counselling in primary care. So there is a criteria for that. As far as I know, it's anybody over 18 who's on a medical card. So that's something to explore with your GP if you'd like to go that way. They offer limited sessions, so you can't go for as long as you need to, but then they may refer you to another service such as ours. There's also the National Counselling Service. You can self-refer to that, but I'd also check the criteria for self-referral there as well. One thing to say about public services, like all mental health services in the country, unfortunately, there is a waiting list. So what I'd be saying is if you are speaking to your GP about going this route, that you might just check in and see what the waiting list is. So you can kind of manage your expectations and maybe find out when you might get a call about it. In terms of the colleges and universities, they offer free access to students, and they would also have a limited number of sessions, and you'd be prioritised based on your need. So I know from NUI Galway in particular, if the college therapist feels that you need a few more, they usually would arrange that for you. But again, they can refer out to organisations like ourselves as well. There's a possible waiting list. I have heard that it depends on the time of the year. So obviously exam time is a very stressful time for people. So sometimes the waiting list is longer around then. And they also provide group wellness workshops. So for managing stress or anxiety, providing mindfulness tools, that kind of thing. So employee assistance programs. So they're provided by some workplaces, and usually they'll have information on that in your employee handbook or through HR. Generally, it's a limited number of sessions, but all of that would be, I suppose, found out through HR. It depends on the company. I've most often heard about it. It's either online or through telephone, which we're all getting used to at the moment. But sometimes they do provide in-person sessions as well. And then there's private therapy. So the average at the moment is usually 50 to 80 euros per session, but some therapists will offer a sliding scale. So say if you're struggling for money, if you're unemployed or a student, some therapists will work with you around that. The reason I want to beware in there is no statutory regulation just yet in counselling and psychotherapy. It's due to come in within the next 2 years, but what that does mean is that you need to be really careful about who you're choosing to see privately. So what I would suggest is finding registered accredited therapists through ISAP, IHIP, or APCP. So they're the ethical bodies that cover accredited therapists. They'll ensure that your therapist has the right qualification, that they're keeping up with their continuous professional development. They're always training and upskilling. It's also worth checking if your health insurance will cover a limited number of sessions. And for that, you may need to talk to the particular counsellor just to see what their qualifications are. Health insurers, they differ from one to another about what they'll cover. Some will only cover counsellors, some will only cover counselling psychologists. So it's worth checking in on that. And then you have counselling and psychotherapy centres. So some of them are chargeable, like ourselves at Let's Get Talking, and some are a group of private therapists who work within the same centre. Most offer a sliding scale, and they may or may not have a waiting list, depending on demand. But if you are calling any of them, it's a good idea just to check in and see how long will I be waiting for that initial appointment. So because I know us best, I might tell you a little bit about how we work. So as a charitable organisation, we offer a non-set fee policy. So what that means in reality is when you come in for an initial appointment with us, we'll have a chat to you about what's manageable for you in terms of a fee. For some people, that's going to be the private rate, that 50 to 80 euros per session. For a lot of people, that's not the private rate, the reason why we were set up was to fill that gap in service. So people pay all along the length of the scale, so it shouldn't be a barrier to attending if money is an issue. Our waiting list at the moment is generally 3 weeks, but if you feel like you need to get in sooner, it's always a good idea to say it when you're calling to book an appointment. So as I said, you'll have an initial appointment first, and that's really to set the fee, but also give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have about the process, and also for us to get to know you, because that helps us then refer you to a therapist in the service to suit your needs. What we ask for is a weekly commitment. We feel that works best. It gives you a chance to build up a relationship with the person you're seeing, and we have an unlimited number of sessions, so you can come for as long as you need to. And we cater to adults, adolescents, those over 11, and couples. So I know I've been using the words therapy, counselling, psychotherapy interchangeably, and there's a reason why. So some people might ask, well, should I go for counselling or should I go for psychotherapy? And there is a big debate about this, even in the profession, and that's probably why I use those terms interchangeably. What I can say is both are talk therapies, which can help you face and address a problem in your lives. But if I was to say that there is a difference, a lot of people would define counselling as, for an easy identified cause to the problem, and it's often short term. If you think about that, makes sense. If you do know what's underlying it, if it hasn't been going on too long, whatever the problem is, then it is likely to be short term. With psychotherapy, it's not an easily identified cause of the problem. You may have had difficulties going on quite a long time, maybe even from childhood, and that's why psychotherapy tends to be more longer term. But what I can say is that most therapists are both counsellors and psychotherapists. You may have counselling and you may have psychotherapy all in the one session. if you have any confusion about it at all, you should always feel free to ask whoever you're seeing, what is their approach, because everybody is different, and every therapist is different. You're just meeting a human in the room, and they can tell you a little bit more about how they work. So I liked this quote, anything that's human is mentionable. Anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. So that's, I suppose, my image and my experience of therapy. It's all about, you feeling safe in the room, you feeling like there's a strong therapeutic relationship, that you can kind of get what you need from it, that you can feel safe to say what you need to say. And that might not happen overnight. It might take a while to build that up. But if you go into your first session, you feel, yeah, this could work. I could, feel safe in here. I could build a relationship with this person. That's a good sign. So the question, when should I go to therapy? And that's different for everybody. But these are a few suggestions from the American Psychological Society. So if you are thinking about or coping with a problem that takes up at least an hour each day, if the problem causes you embarrassment or makes you want to avoid others, hide from them, if you feel shame around it, if that problem has caused your quality of life to decrease, or if that problem has negatively affected school, work, or relationships. You might also consider going to therapy if you've had to make changes in your life or develop habits to cope with the problem. If you've had to find workarounds to kind of get on with day-to-day life. So there are just a few things to think about. If you find yourself in any of those brackets, it might be worth, just having it, just booking that appointment and seeing what it's like. So what happens in a therapy session? It's one thing, I think about, like, not anybody can just go in and observe what happens before. They can't try it out just as an observer beforehand. So it's important to think about a session maybe as a problem-solving session. It's for you. It's, you describe what's going on with you at the moment, your feelings about it, and then a therapist is there to support you with their expertise in helping you resolve that problem. And helping you kind of move closer to having that life you wish to have. So if you think about the want of, feeling stuck, so, they'll help you draw that out. Why are you feeling stuck? What are those blocks? What needs to happen for you to feel unstuck, so you can move forward in getting the kind of life that you wish to have. It's important to note that it's a collaborative process, so the therapist should have no agenda. They're waiting for you to come in with your agenda, and discuss that with you, discuss what you'd like to get out of the process, and then they should fit themselves around you and what you need. I'm asked this question actually probably at every second initial appointment that I meet someone, because it's, it's a big commitment. And the honest answer is how long is a piece of string? So therapy can last anywhere from one session to several months or even years. It really depends on what you want and need. And sometimes when you start in therapy, you may think you want one thing, but as you develop a relationship and you get closer and you build trust with your therapist, you may discover that you want to work on another aspect of your life, and that's okay. So some people, they do come to therapy with a very specific problem they need to solve. So they may be having trouble in one particular relationship in their life, whether it be with a work colleague, but all the rest of the relationships might be going okay. They might feel supported. They might feel like they're able to communicate, and that's it would be quite a specific problem. And they might find that 3 to 6 sessions is sufficient. So when should you stop therapy? So I suppose, when you are thinking about stopping, it should be when, your goals have been met, or perhaps you find that, the relationship with the therapist has run its course. You're not getting anything more that you need. You're not making progress on the goals that you kind of came in with anymore. Then it might be time to ask the therapist, maybe they could refer you to somebody else, but what I would say is that it is really beneficial to discuss stopping therapy with your therapist. Like ending any relationships, you don't just walk out and then you try not to, you'd often just have a chat about it beforehand, and then that's an opportunity to tie up loose ends. what you can reflect back on the progress you've made. What do you feel has worked for you? What do you feel hasn't worked for you? What do you think that, like, if you came to therapy in the future, you might pick up on again and work on? So ideally, of course, therapy ends when all the therapy goals have been met. So that is it. It's just a bit of a word cloud of all the words that I associate with therapy. So feel free to send in any questions you might have. I'm just going to check my phone to see if Amy has sent anything in for me. Not as yet. Wait a few more minutes. Okay, everyone here. So somebody's asked about, being embarrassed going to therapy. So I'm thinking maybe it's, if other people found out. So I suppose I'd like to provide a bit of reassurance there. Whatever happens in the room stays in the room. You don't need to tell anybody you're coming. You don't need to. You can keep it to yourself. Nobody's going to be breaking your confidence. Your therapist isn't going to break your confidence. And we signed up to that when we became therapists, so it's important that you know that. Somebody else asking here, do I have to talk about all my problems in the first session? Absolutely not, and we don't expect you to either. Absolutely not. Obviously it's a process. Like, you're going to take time to build that relationship with your therapist, so you do feel safe to talk about what's going on for you. So we take it piece by piece, and it's at your own pace. And as I said again, it's a collaborative process. Somebody is asking about what happens in an assessment. So in terms of our assessment process, you would book the appointment, and as I said, it's a chance for you to kind of get to know how we work, ask any questions that you might have about counselling, but we'll also ask some background information about you and get to know you. So what's brought you to come to counselling, how can we help, what your expectations are, what your needs are, and maybe a little bit of background about the kind of support you already have in your life. This helps us kind of match you with the best person for you. And now just another question here. How do I get my partner to come to counselling? So I'm sure people have felt that way from time to time, that you wish that, your partner would, or your child, or somebody in your life would go to therapy. Unfortunately, it needs to be their choice. You can give them all the information, you can, set it up, you can, call us, find out more about the service, and you can call other services and find out more, but they need to be ready to go. And it's a big commitment. So, that's understandable. So I have a question here about somebody who's worried about their teenage son at the moment. How can I talk about counselling without sounding pushy? So yeah, that's a difficult one. I'd probably start by, sitting back a little bit, and maybe listening to where he's at, maybe, making the suggestion, like assuming the communication is open. Hopefully it is. But if you have a good relationship and you've listened to what's going on, it's okay to make that suggestion of coming to counselling. And because he's teenage, actually, it's you that can book the appointment. What I'd always suggest, and I've talked to teenagers before about coming in, and what do you got to lose by coming to one appointment, just trying it out. Yeah. Oh yeah, so I mentioned CBT. Somebody's asking what it is. So CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and it's been described, I suppose, as a brief therapy. So cognitive meaning thinking, behavior meaning working on your behavior. So the idea is there's 2 aspects to it. So it's tools to kind of challenge your thinking. So you may have certain thinking patterns that lead you to be feeling sad, anxious, fearful. So challenging the thinking around that. And it also gives you kind of tools to maybe do things different, change your behavior, to hopefully give you to help you feel better. It's really quite effective for anxiety disorders like panic. If you experience panic attacks, it's pretty good for that. And now I'm getting another question about online therapy. So that's something we're all kind of getting used to at the moment. So some of our therapists have never worked online before either. So yeah, in terms of technology, once you're on, and there's no issue with Wi-Fi, everything's okay. We've been surprised about how effective it is. You know, being able to continue on a relationship in therapy with somebody you've been seeing a while, it's a lot better than having nothing, to be able to maintain that contact. So yeah, a lot of people have found it helpful because so many are working from home at the moment. So maybe they're not near the centre that they go to therapy at or whatever. So they've actually found it easier to fit it into their daily lives. We've actually had less cancellations since COVID-19 started. So that is positive news. Any more questions? So that is it. Thank you all for tuning in this evening. You can get in touch with us at our Galway Centre or our Dublin Centre. Either centre will book an assessment for you for online therapy if that's what you're interested in. If you would like to attend the Galway Centre, you can call 091 765 500. The Dublin Centre is 01456 9158. But you'll find more information on our social media pages and at letsgettalking.ie. Thank you all for your time. Have a good evening.